Good morning. Welcome to the Point. This past Wednesday in this studio, we hosted the first televised debate of this election season. It was with the 4 Republican candidates for governor. Now, it was the first of what we hope will be several debates. But let's go back and take a look at some of the highlights. In the first few minutes, I asked about environmental issues. What's going on in Flint? But we started with an issue that may be on your ballot this fall, and that's making recreational marijuana legal. Unless the legislature acts on its own to adopt a resolution, a ballot initiative to legalize marijuana, that will be on the ballot in November. Do you support the legalization of marijuana? And are you concerned, as some have suggested, that because of the passion of the people who do support that if you do not support the legalization, that those people may turn out in big numbers at the polls, consequently making it more difficult for any candidate that doesn't support that legalization?
I don't support the legalization of recreational marijuana. I think that would be bad. There's a ton of research that needs to yet be done. The interactions with medicine, what kind of cancer does it cause, the impact on memory, your ability to work. And so I think that there's a ton of work that needs to be done. But if it's passed, I think that we have to deal with it. And we have to know that the bus driver that's driving your kids is not under the influence of marijuana. We need to figure out how do we keep it out of the hands of minors. And so there are a lot of things that need to be discussed and worked through as a government to make sure that it can be as safe as possible. But I do not support the legalization of recreational marijuana.
Senator Colbeck.
Well, first let me be clear. I will respect the will of the people as expressed at the ballot box. So if they make it legal, I'll respect that will. But I'm telling you, I personally am opposed to it, and here's why. Right now, I have 31,000 job openings in my district. Businesses are still putting drug tests out there for employees. If you're smoking recreational marijuana, you're not going to pass that drug test. And I don't want our government assistance roles to increase. I actually want to get people gainfully employed so that they can get a good job, take care of their families. If we go down this route, I think we're going to see an increase in our government assistance costs, and that's not a road that I want to take Michigan down. We finally got our fiscal house in order, and this has an opportunity to actually bankrupt our state. It's not a course I'd like to pursue, but we'll make it work no matter what happens.
Lieutenant Governor Kelly.
I do not support recreational marijuana, but I want to be clear that I will respect the vote of the people. I do support medical marijuana, on the other hand. In fact, it's becoming more and more clear that it may have a role to play in defeating the opioid addiction epidemic. But this is an opportunity, I think, for a clear contrast. Bill Schuette led the charge against medical marijuana, and even after the will of the voters was decided and the support was enormous, he still continued to fight against the will of the voters, keeping patients from the medicine that they need. So I think it's important that we all speak up on what we think about this initiative. But when the voters have their say, their will must stand.
Attorney General Schuette.
I'm opposed to the legalization of marijuana, but I think citizens across the state will have the opportunity to vote and democracy will prevail. I'm concerned about putting more drugs in the hands of kids, and the opioid epidemic that is raging across Michigan and America is real. You know, recently we had more prescriptions for opioids than there are people in the state of Michigan. And I was at an event in Oakland County last week. I met a woman who shared with me that her son had died through opioid overdose, and it breaks your heart. And we need to crack down on the pill mill docs. We need to, crack down on the heroin dealers that peddle this heroin to those who are in the grip of addiction. And I have an interdiction unit at the Department of Attorney General to do just that. President Trump asked me to come to the White House to discuss the issue of opioids and how the federal government and the states can work together. I think that's another reason why President Trump endorsed me as governor of the state of Michigan.
We move to our second question. First for you, Senator Colbeck. In the 4 years since the Flint water crisis, depending on where you're standing, there have been some improvements, there has been some progress, and there have been disappointments. There's been a lot of finger pointing. There have been a lot of recriminations. So starting with you, Senator, what did the state get right? What did it get wrong? And what still needs to be done by the state to support the people of Flint?
Well, I think it's a broader question about how to support the citizens of Michigan, to be truthful. But what the state did right in the case of Flint is that, number one, we fixed the problem. And we went off and addressed the emergency situation regarding water quality. The more we investigated, though, the found out that the less we knew, because we don't know where these lead pipes are buried across the board. And it turns out that there are 72 other communities with worse lead concentrations in their water than actually the city of Flint. So it's easy to understand that this is a broader problem than just Flint. As we go forward, we need to take in protection of our environment seriously and protection of our water supply seriously. And I've shown a predisposition in my time as a budget chair on state police and Department of Military and Veterans Affairs to be very focused on metrics. And some of the key metrics that we need to focus in on are those metrics that are dealing with environmental quality. And I look forward to doing that as the next governor of Michigan.
Lieutenant Governor Kelly, same question.
The people of the state of the people of the city of Flint really deserve to have somebody that was on the ground working shoulder to shoulder with them. There are enough people trying to grab headlines or play politics, look backward and argue about the past. We needed to work on the future. So I moved my office to Flint at the height of the Flint water crisis. And I was just with people working on whatever needed to be done. In fact, I worked so much in Flint, I ended up filing a Flint city income tax return for that year. It was my place of work, and it wasn't just infrastructure, but it was healthcare and education and economic development and nutrition. But I want to make it very clear that the Flint water crisis has been politicized. The Attorney General has used it as though it is some kind of launching pad for a campaign for governor. The people of the city of Flint deserve to have an investigation that is apart from politics. Frank Kelly called them show trials. The most experienced, one of the most respected legal minds in our state.
Attorney General Schuette.
You know, Flint and the crisis in Flint is all about accountability and justice. You know, 12 people died. 12 people died in Flint. Kids were poisoned. And to think with arrogance you could try to sweep it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen, another rounding error in the fatalities of the challenges of a big city like Flint is the height of arrogance. Brian, you go around the state making false accusations. You're desperate because you're behind and you're trying to change the subject. And the fact is, people died. And I know families in Flint who still to this day drink water only from a plastic bottle. Families in Flint who wash their vegetables with a plastic bottle. Nobody in this room does that, but the families in Flint who are suffering through this. This is about justice. This is about accountability. And if I didn't have this investigation, I would not have been doing my job. I took an oath, and that's just what I'll do. Thank you.
Dr. Hines.
There's not a lot that has really been good dealing with the Flint water crisis. We've spent $23 million, more than that, prosecuting and defending. And for what? We have nothing. We're focused so much on the prosecution and defense, we've forgotten the people of Flint. We've forgotten them. There are over 5,000 lines that still need to be changed out. The people know that if you change out a line now, that there's a bolus of lead that can go into the water and poison a neighbor or another neighborhood. And yet, we want to take the bottled water away from those in Flint. I think it's tragic. I think it's not good. The emphasis has been on, well, let's move to the next city, let's move to another city, but these people are hurting, and we need to solve that issue and not focus on spending all the money, but keeping water there in Flint for those people.
Our first rebuttal of the evening has been called for from the Lieutenant Governor. You have 30 seconds.
Bill Schuette will literally say or do anything to get elected. $23 million has already been spent on this whole process, and they've stretched out the preliminary examinations over the course of years. And so when you consider that fact, and the fact that it's not just me questioning it, it is Maura Corrigan who said that these are inappropriate trials, and it was Frank Kelly who said that they were show trials. It might be convenient for you to say it's just me. It's not only me that is calling you out on this.
All right, gentlemen, again, we need to pay close attention to these lights because those will help keep us on time as we continue through this. So let's start with our third question, which goes to you, Lieutenant Governor, and it's kind of the same theme And for people here in West Michigan, though we're being seen around the state, it has become something that we have become used to hearing about, and that is PFAS, also other emerging contaminants. There are people that are concerned about Line 5 and the Straits of Mackinac. There are a lot of environmental concerns. Some people think there could be an environmental disaster in the Straits, one of the largest repositories of fresh water in North America. So the question is, what would you do if you were elected governor about Michigan's environmental issues and emerging contaminants in a state that aggressively markets itself as pure Michigan?
We have a special responsibility here in Michigan as stewards of some of the most important natural resources you'll find anywhere around the globe. And so we have to be proactive. We can't wait for problems. So for example, with PFAS, the state of Michigan is actually leading in the nation. There's so many states that haven't even started, and yet we're out front on this because it matters that much. In terms of Line 5, I share the concerns that so many people around our state have. And I've come to the conclusion that we need to eliminate the risk of having the oil run through the straits in a way that it can be hooked or struck by an anchor. We had a feasibility study recently ran, and it has determined that there are other options. And so we need to take those options, because the comeback of Michigan requires that we take care of our resources.
Mr. Attorney General.
You bet. Everybody in Michigan has it packed in our DNA, the responsibility of stewardship, ecology, 20% of the world's fresh water that surround our two wonderful peninsulas. Whether it's PFAS, whether it's Line 5, whether it's water diversion, it's a big responsibility. You know, it's Memorial Day is coming upon us, and people will go across the bridge, that 4.5 miles of straits where there are pipes that are down there, and I happen to think we ought to build a tunnel, a utility corridor where we could have all the concern and environmental safety responsibilities. We could be visibly, personally inspected. We need to make sure we also provide propane to the Upper Peninsula, and our energy producers get their energy to market. You know, the other big issue here is water diversion. I'm opposed to diversion of water from the Great Lakes. It's too much important legacy for Michigan.
Dr. Hines.
We have over 7,000 toxic sites right here in Michigan that are not being addressed. They're leaking PFAS, they're leaking other chemicals. Some of those chemicals we know cause cancer. How do you pay for the cleanup? We've attempted, we've run out of money. What can we do? One of the things we can do is that Michigan is an international dumping ground, believe it or not. 25% of the trash that comes to Michigan comes from outside of Michigan that we put in our dumps. We charge 36 cents a ton. Wisconsin charges $13 a ton. We could charge more and use those funds to help clean up these toxic sites. I'm very concerned about running oil through the bottom of our Great Lakes. I think it's tragic. You know, a pipeline that's 63 years old is not as good as it was when it was put in. If it leaks, it's tragic. It can be a disaster, and we're responsible for keeping an eye on it and doing something about it.
Senator Colbeck.
Well, you know, my work on the International Space Station was actually, I was responsible for the environmental control and life support system. And you want to talk about a fragile ecosystem, nothing like living in a tin can up in space. And so I have an appreciation for a lot of these environmental concerns. And it's given me an appreciation for the fact that, you know, you sometimes have to prioritize what are the most important effects that you have to address first. And as governor, one of the things I'll do is go off and put together a prioritized list based on the number of lives that are actually impacted by a given contaminant. You know, I've got an issue in my own district right now where we've got a vinyl chloride spill that we've been treating. And the way that I approach that is working with DEQ and Department of Health and Human Services to go off and get the citizens in that area a clean bill of health, a peace of mind, so that their property values can be restored and that they can have that peace of mind. And I was working with the business responsible for that to make that happen. And that's what it takes, partnership, and enforce what I call the good neighbor policy.
The four candidates didn't agree on everything, and in our coming segment, we're going to talk about two issues, one that deals with practical matters like school safety, and another that deals with something very political. That's all next. To the point. Welcome back to the Point. This past week, we had our first debate for this election cycle, the first of what we hope will be a number of those. The Republican candidates for governor joined me here in this studio, and we talked about a wide range of subjects, including something very serious for everybody in the country, and that's safety. Safety at our schools. The issue of school safety, it has been brought to the forefront with a horrible shooting in Florida, and once again we are thinking about how to keep our students safe in schools, and I want to talk about that specifically. What needs to be done to protect students when they are at schools? What is the state's role in that protection, and what part of that decision should be left up to local school districts?
We know when our kids went to public school, so did my wife and I, and when you take your child to school, first time, maybe they walk, maybe you drop them off, later they drive their car, but you want to make sure they come home safely. And when they don't, it's every parent's nightmare. And that's what happened in Parkland, and we've seen that in too many occasions across the country. We need to do a number of things. Number one, there's a mental health crisis in America today. We need to treat and help people who have a mental health crisis. Cruz, the guy in Florida, he was trying to get help, but no one paid any attention. Second, we need to have more initiatives like OK to Say. OK to Say is Michigan's school safety initiative that we put in place by the Department of Attorney General, where it's a 24/7, 365 way. If you're concerned about active violence in school, you can call or text in. And also, we need to provide trained security officers. Not every teacher, but trained security officers ought to be able to protect our students, our children in their school.
Dr. Hines.
This has been a tragic thing that's happened over and over and over again. And the question is, what do you do about it? And I think it takes all of us to try to prevent something like this. And so when a friend or a neighbor talks about hurting themselves or somebody else, we need to be alert to it. We need to be able to notify law enforcement and then trust that they will do something about it, that they will actually act upon the concern that somebody's had. Certainly, behavioral health is very important. There are counselors in schools that know that there are students that are at risk for harming themselves and others. This is information that needs to be transmitted. I would support individual school districts deciding what they would like to do as far as resource officers or police guarding and protecting their school. There are districts in this state that police are far away, and so they have to decide what are they going to do to best protect their students.
Senator Colvin.
I've heard the arguments around mental health awareness, and I'm here to tell you, you're never going to know enough information to go off and rule out these scenarios with this top-down control of society, essentially. And I want to harken back to some sage words from Benjamin Franklin. He said, "Those willing to give up freedom for security deserve neither." And what we're at risk of doing right now is to go off and sacrifice some basic liberties for the sake of some false sense of security. We knew everything we need to know about the shooter out at Fort Hood. We knew everything that was going on. We knew what his intentions were. The key is we didn't act upon it. And we didn't have people that could actually go off and defend themselves. Let's go back to a tale of two scenarios. We had the Parkland shooting, where we had their school safety officer, Coach Heiss, act as a human shield for 4 kids. He couldn't defend himself. Maryland was a much different story. We had a school resource officer that was armed. We need to focus on protection of our Second Amendment rights and honor those rights.
Lieutenant Governor Kelly.
There's nothing more important than the safety of our kids. So I think we should take a practical approach. It's first starting with security at our schools. I mean, we have security. Security is something we've figured out in so many different places. So it's hardening of the building, but it's also monitoring the entire campus. And it's fail-safe communication with local law enforcement. I do believe there should be a lot of local control about the amount of security that is in place in any given place, in any given school. But it is very clear that our kids need to learn to live successful lives, and they're not going to be able to learn unless they're in a safe environment. So this has to be a top priority. If we want to continue this comeback, if we want to equip our kids to go out there and have hopes and dreams and aspirations and reach those dreams and add the next 500,000 jobs in Michigan, we need to keep them safe.
While the bulk of our time during the debate was spent talking about policy, the subject of politics had to come up, and so it did, by a question that was suggested by one of our viewers. The Attorney General has mentioned a couple of times this evening about the support of President Trump. And this question comes from one of our viewers, so we want to get all of the candidates to weigh in. And here is the question from the viewer. My husband and I are watching closely to see who supports our president. It starts out actually by saying, will they, meaning you, the candidates, support our president and his agenda? My husband and I are watching closely to see who supports our president. We will not vote for a candidate that does not. Senator Cole.
Yeah.
So?
Yeah, well, one thing I've noticed is that, first of all, I think President Trump got some really bad information in regards to his endorsement. Second of all, the only time I've ever seen the Attorney General go off and support President Trump is when President Trump's in town or Vice President Pence is in town. I'm actually out there with the grassroots, actually rallying the base, making sure that we've got President Trump's six. And because when President Trump was under attack, under withering attack, even before he took office, I was out there in the Capitol steps making sure that he knew that we were supporting him and rallying the base, making sure that we honored the fact that we have a president for the first time in a long time that's actually doing what he said he would go off and do. So I fully support President Trump. I asked him to reconsider his endorsement, obviously, but most of the folks who actually voted for President Trump in the state of Michigan are actually back in our campaign. And it's evident at every single Trump rally you go to.
Lieutenant Governor.
I want to make it clear that I support the president. His success is our success, and I voted for him. Now, 2016, there was a lot of division within the family and within the Republican Party. But we all got there when it counted on Election Day, and he was elected president. I mean, even Bill Schuette served as the campaign chairperson for Jeb Bush. Used the word deplorable on Donald Trump before Hillary even did. But still, we all got there when it counted the most. And so as we move forward, it's about working together on shared priorities, things like tax cuts, defeating the opioid addiction epidemic, or now the Sue Locks, which is great to have the president's support behind that Michigan initiative, behind that Michigan priority. So as we move forward, we need to work together in the interests of our people, and I'll look forward to working with the president as your next governor.
Mr. Attorney General.
I am grateful for the support and endorsement of my campaign for governor by President Trump. And he's invited me to the White House to talk about human trafficking quite recently, where now, because of a bill President Trump signed, gives the attorneys general and prosecutors across Michigan and America the ability to crack down on these bad actor websites like Backpage and Craigslist. And the president is supporting me, and it wasn't even a close contest, and I appreciate his endorsement. And Brian, the fact is that in October 2016, you renounced your support of President Trump, and look what has happened after President Trump's election. Neil Gorsuch to the United States Supreme Court, federal judges, rule of law judges across the country, and now with tax cuts, we're building the Ram truck. We're going to bring the Ram truck from Mexico to Michigan, $1 billion investment, 2,500 more jobs. And, you know, Brian, you deserted Trump, and the president knows who was with him and who was not.
Dr. Hines.
This is an interesting conversation. I have supported Trump from the very beginning. I have pictures, and I love the guy. I don't know why. I love him. I like what he's doing. I like the construction of a wall. I like, of course, the tax reform. Brian Kelly did withdraw his support from Trump, several weeks before the general election. I'm so sorry he did that. I was so disappointed. Bill Schuette, Trump was not his first choice, but not by a long shot. He campaigned against Trump. And so there's a little bit of hypocrisy here. But Trump is our president, and I believe placed there by God, and we should be praying for him. The guy can't even drink a cup of water without being criticized. I mean, can you imagine not being able to do anything without criticism? So I would encourage our viewers to pray for him and encourage him. He is our president.
That, of course, is just a small part of the debate. You can see it all at woodtv.com. And when we come back, we'll talk about future debates. To the point. All out of time for this morning. See you next week. To the point.